And this political pulse, we are joined by none other than South Dakota Governor Larry Rhoden. Now, Governor, really interesting year you've had so far. You started off as Lieutenant Governor. You took over now as Governor as Kristi Noem went into that DHS position. What has it been like for you so far taking the reins as Governor, and what have been the biggest challenges that you've seen so far running the state?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's just been such a tremendous honor. You think about a ranch kid from western South Dakota, born and raised on the ranch, and then to get the opportunity to serve in the legislature in an expanded capacity that way for 16 years and 6 years as lieutenant governor, to have the opportunity to serve as governor has just been a tremendous thing for me, and so quite an honor. It was quite a whirlwind the last 6 months, 5 months since I became governor. Of course, it was we made history. It was the first transition during session in the history of our state. So it was kind of stressful, just looking forward to it and how that was all going to take shape. But looking in the rearview mirror, it went so well, I couldn't have scripted it better. The transition went pretty smoothly. We had a very tough session because we had like 40% new members, but even with that, we did a lot of good things and we got through it in good shape. I think the biggest challenge was the prison issue and not getting that across the finish line. It was like a 4-year process to get it to the finish line this year, and so for that to fail was pretty disappointing. But even out of those ashes, I think we came so far through it pretty well. The task force just had their last meeting. I gave them 3 charges, 3 questions for that task force. Do we need a new facility? Assuming we do, where should it be built and how big should it be? And that committee has met us several times through this, the interim, and we got a unanimous support to all 3 questions. And so we're in the process of working with leadership to schedule a special session sometime later on. The July date that I had set as a goal was a little, I knew that would be a pretty tight schedule.
Well, it looked like at the end there it really came down to locations, right? They were really trying to figure out the location. Now they've narrowed it down to 2, I believe, in the Sioux Falls area. Is that where it's at right now?
Yes, and like I said, they got a unanimous vote on that, which to me was pretty incredible, because we very intentionally, when I picked that task force, it's like the lieutenant governor said early on, I've said it, it wasn't good enough to come out of a 16-member committee with a 10 to 6 vote. We needed broad support because we had a broad spectrum representing the legislature as a body in that group, and so for them to navigate through that this summer, it's been a great exercise. Lieutenant Governor Van Huysen did a great job of bringing that team together, and so to get unanimous votes on all 3 questions was pretty amazing.
As you know, the state is divided East and West River, and this is such an East River topic as the prison sits East River, although if you're an inmate and you end up an inmate West River, chances are you are going to serve time at the state penitentiary, depending on the charge, in Sioux Falls. So how big of an issue is this? Because I think out here there is a little bit of a disconnect where people out here, they don't drive by the state penitentiary. It's not really in their part of the state. They don't feel like it's a local issue.
I've not even thought about it in those terms, because it really isn't an east-west. Obviously, if you live in the Sioux Falls area, it's more impactful than you are in the outskirts or even western South Dakota. But for me, it got really real after I took a tour of that prison. Such a dark place, and to look around and what the conditions that we expect our inmates to put up with, the lack of the ability to rehabilitate our prisoners and get them back in society as productive members of society, rather than watching the revolving door of them getting out of the penitentiary and reoffending and ending up right back there. So to me, it became very crystal clear that we just need to address that problem, and the sooner the better.
Do you think part of the issue with getting that support, you talk about there was a lot of lead up to this, but you also had a legislature with a lot of new members, as you mentioned?
Certainly, that was the key factor, like 40% new members. And I'm not casting blame because as the new members, even though it was a long process for the veteran legislators and we were on the final leg, it wasn't the final leg for them. That was the first, they had heard about it. And so I think it was kind of a shock to them, kind of the sticker shock of getting elected to the legislature and find out we're preparing to spend $750 million on a prison project. It was a lot for them to wrap their arms around. And that's why on that task force, put a number of those new members on that task force. And now they've all had a chance to tour it, and they all agreed unanimously that we do indeed need to build a new prison.
I want to take things back to the national stage if we can. Governor Kristi Noem, at the time you were Lieutenant Governor, now DHS Secretary. The whole time you were serving as Lieutenant Governor, I would have to imagine there was something in the back of your mind saying, you know, she may be called to the national stage and I may have to slide into the governor's seat. I'm just curious if these discussions happened before she took the DHS Secretary position, just given that her national profile was growing. And I'm just curious what your relationship has been like with her since she's taken that post, and if she's guided you at all in the last few months of taking the steering wheel here in South Dakota.
Yeah, well, the answer is yeah. As I went farther along and the governor built more of a national profile and her name was being bantered a lot more for different positions, it started to get real. And I have several close confidants and allies and people that I trust implicitly that come alongside me and said, you really need to be thinking in these kind of terms just so you're prepared to be prepared. And so the closer we got to that date, the more intense those conversations and deliberate those conversations got. And I also realized that the Rhoden administration, under Kristi's leadership, had put together a very talented crew. And so I resolved early on that I was going to make that transition. If indeed it happened, I'd make that transition as smooth as possible and keep the same people on the team and in the cabinet. I was involved in most all of the interviews that hired those people, so I was very directly involved. So that was an easy call for me. And since then, of course, Kristi, our communication's been a lot less than it was prior to her leaving, but we text probably once a week at least about something. And we had we have entered that 287G program where we're basically allowing ICE, our highway patrol, to come alongside ICE and help them do the procedural stuff on illegal immigrants that are being transferred out of South Dakota. And also when the mod case that got resolved, met with her in DC then. Secretary Rollins had both at our press conference. We were both involved in making that happen. And so yeah, we still have a good relationship. I'll still check in with her from time to time or comment on something she's done and give her a few words of encouragement because she's got a big job on her hands. And I've always said that Kristi, I don't know if she liked it much, but I used to say that Kristi's tougher than a Waffle House steak. And so I think she's well equipped for the job she's got.
I want to take things just to the election level here. I think there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not you're going to seek re-election for the governor's seat. Right now, I know you have yet to make a decision, but can you at least describe to us where you're at in the decision-making process there? And you know, as we're kind of seeing, you know, Attorney General Marty Jackley just announced for the congressional seat. He's going to run for the congressional seat. I think that was a little bit of a surprise. People thought he was looking at the governor's seat, but that has me wondering if you're looking at any of these other potential positions.
Well, I will say this No, I'm not looking at like a position in D.C. I ran for the U.S. Senate a few years back, and I've traveled to D.C. a number of times, and you know, on that front, I will say this. Christie used to say it, and I believe it's absolutely true, that what's wrong with the United States won't be resolved at the federal level. It'll be states and the state governors. And the more I've been in D.C., the less I like being there. And I know in my heart of hearts I couldn't survive more than a few weeks in D.C. So I will not seek any of the election of any of those positions. As far as back home in the governor's race, I've said it before and I'll say it again, these elections, these campaigns last way too long. And it's crazy the amount of money that people raise in these races. And I've had the opportunity that I've enjoyed immensely being governor. And so I'm going to continue to be governor for a while before I'm a candidate. I've been extremely amazed at the amount of encouragement that I've received as I've traveled the state and toured businesses and got a lot of input from folks. I've been very encouraged by the amount of support that people asking me to consider doing that.
I want to go back to D.C. There's an interesting comment you made. The more you're there, the less you like being there, and it seems like your belief might be that D.C. could use a little bit of that state level energy. I mean, where do you think D.C. is off on the wrong foot right now?
Well,
as a whole, you know.
As a whole, I think, I've said it when I was in the legislature, that it wasn't the Democrats, and it's not the Democrats or the Republicans, it's the process. And they're so entrenched in just the, you know, the procedural and the partisan bickering. And I don't know how you get past that. I do believe that Trump has made a huge difference, and I should clarify that from the federal level, because day and night difference for me as governor. What I saw, you know, of course I was lieutenant governor. First 2 years we had Trump. 4 years we had the Biden administration. Now we have Trump again. So I've seen the transition back and forth. When we have, now that Trump's president, I'm back on the offensive. We're getting things done. We're being proactive with our federal counterparts. Secretary Rhoden, Secretary of Agriculture, have a close relationship with her and already works on several issues with her, and EPA Administrator Zeldin. And so the results we've seen just in the last few months is more significant than what Christie and I saw in the previous 4 years with the previous administration. And so I think that Trump has made a huge difference for him. So I look forward to continuing to work with him and the relationships we've made.
I know in a lot of our conversations you've expressed that you feel like there's a lot better communication between you and DC, and they're a lot more receptive to the feedback that you're giving them.
Yeah, and I'd give you an example. It was a year ago, of course, the mod case, out west we've heard of that, and over a year ago, probably a year and a half ago, I brought it to Governor Noem's attention, and she did the same process I did this year. She wrote a letter to Vilsack, tried to call the administration and get something done. Crickets. A year later, I wrote a letter to Secretary Rollins, picked up the phone and called her. We had a conversation. She immediately went to work on that with the UJS, and a few weeks later, after a number of conversations, she called me up and says, "Hey, can you make it to DC next Wednesday for a press conference? We're announcing they're dropping all the charges." And that's pretty stark contrast to what we went through a year ago with the previous administration.
At that press conference, I remember you made a comment about the fact that you, almost with intent, worked quietly, that you and Governor Noem at the time had worked quietly on this issue. I am curious why you decided to work quietly on it as opposed to, you know, making a lot of noise about the case.
So it's easy because the people that were writing letters and then publishing the letters to the press before they sent it to the people that can actually get something done, we're actually inhibiting the process. Because when you're dealing with DC and the bureaucrats, when they see that, or even me as governor, when I see, and I've had this happen, legislators write a letter and send it to the press that they're urging the governor to do this, this, and this, and they'll send that letter to the press before they send it to me, or in times that I've never got it. What does that do for my attitude?
Seems a bit performative, more than intentional.
It gives me an attitude toward them. It's no different there. You know, if you're beating your chest and sending letters out to the press, all you're doing is trying to gain, jump in front of a parade, I guess. And when the first time I talked to Secretary Rollins, she says, let's just keep our heads down, let me work on this. I said, absolutely.
So I want to go back to your governorship. If you choose not to seek re-election, or if just for any reason you don't maintain the seat past this term, what footprint do you hope to leave on the state of South Dakota? And I'm curious if there's any West River influence you want to leave there, given that it's rare to have a West River governor.
Well, I think, I think it's just a matter of perspective, but a lot of the West River is just, I think we have a quieter environment. I think it was Matt Conenkamp, a son of a former justice, that used to tell me about a book called Solitude and Leadership. And I think being alone with your thoughts presents the opportunity to, to have a clear head. And I think my dad and mom taught us to leave it better than when you got it. And I think that would be my perspective as governor, that my goal would be to leave the state a better place when I'm done being governor than it was when I got there.
Do you have any defining points of that? Anything that you say, these would be a metric that if I left and we improve this or we improve that, I'll feel pretty good?
Well, I think we've already, the Rhoden administration and previous governors for that matter, we've had some good governors, have left a pretty good legacy. And I want to continue that and build on it. I think COVID was a great litmus test for the planet, and South Dakota passed that test pretty well. And I think we recognize the value of our rights, liberties, and freedoms, and the original intent of our founding fathers of a free country, and just the understanding that our rights, liberties, and freedoms are a product given to us by God, not by government. And that's pretty simple, but yet it's pretty profound as far as what government should look like. And so my goal is to leave a state government that's friendlier toward allowing people just the freedom to succeed.
I want to get into some policy, because this week we do have a big West River Policy Week with the Task Force on Property Taxes meeting. Your proposal to allow counties to enact their own countywide sales tax, how has that been received so far? And have you seen anything out of this task force that has perked your interest, something that you think might be a good idea?
Well, the answer is I haven't seen anything. I don't know that anything other than some conversation has come out of that task force. It makes me kind of curious what they will come up with. The one thing they've stated, they've laid it out as a goal to cut owner-occupied taxes by 50%. Well, understand that is a little perplexing to me as a governor, because if you remember last session, the governor's Noam proposed a budget. I proposed the same budget to cut spending by $80 million in state agencies. And that budget was handed off to the very people that are on this task force and the same leaders. And at the end of the day, not only did they not make any additional cuts, they actually restored about $8 million worth of the cuts that I had proposed. So they actually spent $8 million more than was proposed in the budget. So those same legislators are now saying we're going to make a 50% cut, which amounts to $350 million. $350 million on an ongoing basis year after year. I'm curious to see what they're going to propose to get to that point.
I know, and when I looked at and this is all just through an article that I read, but one of the things that they had brought up was looking at all options, and one of those being spending cuts. And I know there have been some concerns expressed about spending. I'm curious where you fall in that conversation with the counties and the local spending, if that needs to be reined in a little bit to offset or to alleviate property taxes.
Well, they can have that conversation, and I'll be, if they propose spending cuts, I'm happy to look at them. And I'll never say there isn't areas that we can do better as finding those cuts, but I'm just pointing out the irony of the same people that are going to find $350 million of cuts not only did not find cuts last year, but added $8 million to the spending. That's kind of hard to reconcile those two deals. And the fact that I still believe that my solution is best because it's a local option. It allows the county by counties to make those decisions for themselves. And I'll reiterate the fact that this is a 5-county problem. Because if you look at the numbers, we just last week, the American Tax Foundation, they always rank the states on their tax systems. And South Dakota ranked as a state on taxes in general was the second lowest tax state in the nation. Wyoming was the only state that was ahead of us. And on property taxes specifically, in our area, we have the lowest property taxes of any state in this whole region. And so that tells me that the system's not broke. We have a fair tax system, but we have some distinct problems in a handful of counties. And the bill that I propose would resolve that to a large degree.
Yeah, and just to reiterate here, just so I can fill people in on the boring policy stuff, it would be that counties can have their own half-a-cent sales tax, and all the money from that half-cent sales tax would actually go, this would be a local pot of money, right, that would then contribute towards offsetting property taxes?
Yeah, it would, the half-cent would, all that money would go into an owner-occupied tax relief system. It was the county's mill levy for the 3 class of property. It would apply specifically to owner-occupied. 100% of that revenue of that half-cent sales tax would go to buy down the taxes on the owner-occupied.
I want to close out with just talking about national politics. Again, we talked a little bit about the Trump administration. I have a couple questions. They're almost the exact opposite, but we'll start here. So far, what do you think have been the biggest wins the Trump administration has delivered for South Dakota?
Well, I believe the biggest win that he's delivered for the United States is just the confidence that we're being led in the right direction. And I know there's still a lot of concerns and a lot of conversation about the tariffs. And in an ag state like South Dakota, that's legitimate. But I still get a very strong sense from even the farmers and ranchers that there's a pretty strong trust in Trump's ability to negotiate those trade deals, and that we'll come out at the other end better off than we are now.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question, is what has the administration done on the other side that as a governor might have you concerned at the local level? And it sounds like from what you've said is the tariffs have you a little bit nervous, but you're overall confident?
Yeah, and I think the other issue and some of the stuff with the big beautiful bill, I think there's a lot of good in that. I think they're heading in the right direction. There are things that concern me when they have federal programs that they're cutting, or specifically the areas where they're transferring, not necessarily making cuts, but they're transferring a portion of that load to the states. Because a lot of those programs are federal programs that the states had nothing to do with, and now we're getting it put on our plates to assume more of the liability from them programs. And I don't think that's a policy that I will take exception to.
Yeah, and what program, have you identified any programs where you've seen this shift? I know I believe we were talking about this down in Hot Springs when you were down at the VA Center. We were talking about the big beautiful bill, and you had said that you had some concerns. You kind of had maintained, you were we'll just say you didn't offer too many details on what your concerns were, but I believe somebody also in that same conversation had brought up the VA and some of the VA stuff. Was that wrapped in there?
I don't know, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
The VA, no.
Okay, I didn't know if it was any of their services. So what exact services are you seeing being shifted onto the state that have you concerned?
Well, what I'm concerned about, the big kahuna would be the FMAP on our Medicaid funding and the percentage. I warned, kind of flagged us down as a legislator years ago when they were, and as a state when we went through the Medicaid expansion. We did so with the understanding, the people voted that in. They couldn't get it through the legislature, went on the ballot. But my concern was always that they lured us into Medicaid expansion saying that the feds would pay 95% of that bill. Well, we're seeing now where they are back, the feds are backing away on that commitment, and states and South Dakota's got hit pretty hard by assuming a bigger and bigger piece of the pie on the Medicaid funding.
I just want to give you the floor here. We'll give you the floor. Anything you think we haven't gotten to that you'd like to talk about?
Nope. It's just like I began with, I have been thrilled to have this opportunity. Our opportunities for tour, Open for Opportunities tour, will continue on, and I'm amazed every time we go out at the nuggets I find in South Dakota, and the businesses I didn't know existed, and the input I get from the citizens of the state.
Yeah, your staff tells me that sometimes they're convinced you're going to apply to some of these businesses.
Well, it's been extremely interesting just to see the manufacturing that I didn't know exist, and even in the egg operations, and we're going to be at SDSU and some of the animal, like at our animal diagnostic lab next week or later on this week, I guess it is, and I'm always excited to see what we see next.
Yeah, well, Governor, we really do appreciate you coming in and giving us your time this morning here in Rapid City. That's going to do it for this Political Pulse. Again, huge thanks to Governor Larry Rhoden for coming in, and we'll see you next week.